Well, hello, Sassy Stampers, and thank you for joining me for the June 2021 virtual class. Let's get started with what you are going to have in your kit. You're going to have a piece of black cardstock, a solid piece of 8.5 by 11 black cardstock, and a solid piece of 8.5 by 11 white cardstock. After that, everything else you are going to supply yourself. So let's look at how we're going to cut our black cardstock. The first thing we're going to do is cut a piece, which will just be cutting your black cardstock in half so that you have a 5.5 by 8.5 piece of cardstock. You'll score it right down the middle. You'll score it at 4 1/4, and that becomes your card base. Now I have on here, cut this first. Because if you start cutting the other pieces you will need, which is 4 1/2 by 3 1/4 and 3 1/2 by 2 1/4, it's possible that you will cut your cardstock in a way that you're not going to have card base left over. So cut this one first. Just cut it in half, score it, and that becomes your card base. Easy, easy. We all know how to use our cutting tools, and even if you didn't have a cutting tool, you know how to use a ruler and a pencil so that you could mark and then use scissors to cut along those lines. You're going to get cleaner lines if you use your trimmer, which either a guillotine trimmer or a string trimmer or whatever kind of trimmer you have. But we can all do this. Now with your white cardstock, you're going to cut 5 1/4 by 4, 4 1/4 by 3, and 3 1/2 by 2. So I'm going to leave that up for just a moment so that you can write these down. Now what this does, by having these different sizes of cardstock, this will be your base cardstock. And see how we have a nice little frame of black around our white. Then our next biggest black piece will be centered here. Our next biggest white piece centered here with a nice little black frame. Our next biggest black piece centered here. And our last piece here. And look how beautiful. Even that alone is a really, really nice card. It's a good look. And I'm going to show you some cards that were done by Sally Hampton and some by Teresa Rosbrom. And I want to show you this. Teresa did some cards where she put them at wonky angles. Look how cute that is. As long as you keep your black and white centered on each other so that you have a nice even frame, having them at wonky angles can be really cute. And listen, you can do this triple time stamping or triple stamping, whatever you want to call it, in many different ways. You can do it with rectangles like this. You can do different dimensions. You can do circles. You can do ovals. You could do hearts. But what you want to remember, anytime you're going to do triple stamping, and it could even be quadruple or 5 or however many pieces you want to do, you want to have a frame. Because as we'll see when we're stamping, when we stack up this card, the white card bases, because what we're going to do, we're going to take the black ones out. And we're going to stamp on these. Your stamp will not stamp really cleanly right along the edge here because there's a little bit of a rise here. Even if you're using a MISTI stamping tool, which with a MISTI or some other kind of stamping tool, a Stamp-A-Majig or something where you can stamp over and over, even with those, you don't get a super clean stamp right at the edge where the cardstock is stamped. So it's important to have that frame. Where it did not stamp clearly, this little frame hides that tiny edge that didn't stamp clearly. So let's get started with our stamping. And one more time, I'm going to put your white cardstock sizes here, your black cardstock sizes here. So you have that in a screenshot, all the different sizes you need. And while I've been jabbering on, hopefully you are cutting these cardstock pieces into their proper sizes for the cardstock. I'm going to get my stamps ready. We'll come back and we will start stamping our triple time stamping. I hope that you will be able to see this really well, because what we're going to do is we're going to stack these 3 papers, and we're going to put a tiny bit of adhesive, a little bit of tape runner on them to get them lined up just right, and they will be stuck together just long enough for us to stamp them. Then we'll pull them apart and put our frames around them. So one of the ways that you can stick these together and not have them stick permanently is to touch it just a little bit before you lay it down. That takes a tiny bit of the stick away. Now I like to line up my piece of paper on a mat to help me visualize how to get it centered. And you want to do as good a job as you can here. And I'm sorry that it's difficult to see on this. You know what I'll do? I'll get a pencil and I'll trace around the edge of it so that you can see. Now don't do this. Don't trace around the edge of yours with a pencil. I'm just doing this so that you'll be able to see. Now it doesn't matter because my frame will cover this up, but now you can sort of see the edge there, how I've lined it up. The next thing we want to do is put our big one down. And this one is our 5 1/4 by 4. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put a little bit of tape runner, just a little. I'm going to touch it just a couple of times to get the sticky, take a little bit of the sticky away from it. And then I'm going to line it up as best I can, realizing that I am an imperfect human being, but I'm going to do my best and lay it down. Don't put pencil on yours. I'm just doing this so you can see the edges because it's so difficult to see white on white on a camera. Oh, look, I got a little extra. I'm a messy penciler. Okay. So you can see how we've got them stacked up and they're stuck together just barely. Now I am going to use a Misty stamping tool because I'm not a great stamper. I tend to mess up a lot, but I have my stamp lined up in here already, and it's going to stamp off the edge a little bit, but that's okay with me. If I'm going to go off the edge of one side, I'm going to go off the edge of both. So there's my image. And my Misty is very dirty, so please excuse the dirtiness of my image there. If you want to know what image I am stamping, it is from Fresh Cut Roses by Altenew. It's called Fresh Cut Roses by Altenew. It's got some beautiful little sayings and sentiments, and I really loved this image. So we want to press down, and we want to give it nice even pressure. You can press with your hand, or I have my Chuckster tool that I always use. It's just easier on my hand to do it this way. And I'm going to let that ink good and soak into that paper and see how good of an image we got here. I'm calling it good. So our next step is going to be to color these however you are going to color. And while you're coloring, I would leave them stuck together. Surprise, surprise, I am not going to color with Copics or colored pencils today. I'm going to use a variety of distress inks. And I'm going to, you can use sponge daubers. These happen to be little tiny brushes that are kind of like sponge daubers. These are from iCrafter, but these are also available from Simon Says Stamp. And I think they're a little less expensive if you get the Simon Says Stamp ones. But I like how they're color coordinated. So I know I want pink, red, and yellow roses. And I'm just gonna have some fun. I'm just gonna set these out and go to town with my different colors. So maybe I'll start light and work darker. We shall see. I am going to keep very handy. I think these are the colors I'll be using the most. Greens, pinks, yellows. I'm going to keep very handy a microfiber cloth, because in between each color, I want to clean these off just to make sure that I don't really mess up my ink pads or, you know, have a problem with any of that. So I have my microfiber cloth here. I'm going to keep it handy so that I can clean them off in between. And this is an experiment, and if it goes awry, then, oh well, we'll live and learn. I am not using my water media mat because I'm going to try to hold these still myself as I work this color. And I'm using this just like I would use a sponge dauber. So in other words, I'm not super concerned about it being perfect. I'm not trying to color like I would with a marker. I'm trying to color the same way that you do when you use a sponge dauber. So a lot of Heartfelt Creations stuff is when they teach their classes, every class I've ever taken from Heartfelt, they teach you to use sponge daubers. And it is great because it's a super fast way to get a lot of color on a card. And I think it's beautiful. It looks great. Now we're coming across the same problem that you have with stamping when you're triple time stamping, that right here in the corners, even though I'm using a blender brush, a tiny little blender brush or sponge dauber, you're not going to get great color right on those edges. I'm telling you once again, don't worry about it. For those of you, especially if you're a little bit newer to stamping, or if you're just kind of, it's your personality that you really want things to be perfect, it's going to be hard for you to let that go. But trust me, just let it go for now. We're going to see how those frames really make a big difference. I'm doing the outside edges of my roses, the kind of lightest part of them. Seems to me they get darker as they move inward. And once again, if I get outside of the lines, I'm not worried about it, because we know that this is a very loose way of coloring. I am sort of holding on because since I only have one tiny little piece of adhesive in the middle, these could move on me. So remember I said we want to clean these off before we move on to our next color, just to, you know, do our best to not mess up our inks. Because I am going to move to a darker pink. This is now Worn Lipstick, much darker pink. Really clean that off first before I come in here with the Worn Lipstick, which is darker. Doesn't look too much darker, but hopefully, oh look, I got one of those dreaded big circle. When you're blending, you don't want that big circle to show. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to keep moving. I want this a little bit darker as I move up. A little darker towards the center. And when I get to the very center, once again, cleaning this off, over here to the right. I'm going to go to an even darker pink, which Festive Berries I think is darker. It looks darker in the pad, doesn't it? And gonna do the centers and Festive Berry. It's definitely a brighter pink. Ooh. Got a circle there, but look, I was lucky. It went right into the center of that flower. Blend that out just a little bit. And the end of this one. The end of this one. Ooh, got a circle and it's not pretty. Hopefully that will be not too obvious. It's kind of hard for me to work with these blenders. Now there is something I want to do. I love it when a pink rose has a little bit of yellow to it. So I'm going to use squeezed lemonade. And this very well could turn these kind of orangey, because we know red and yellow makes orange, and there's obviously going to be red in a pink, because white and red make pink. But I love how in nature roses are rarely one color. I like when they have a little bit of color to the edges. So I'm adding a little bit of yellow around these edges, just because I think that's so pretty. Adds a little bit of visual interest to what we're working on. And we didn't get too orangey. It might have done a little bit of that, but that's okay. We can live with that. So let's move on to our greens. Some of you are looking at this saying, oh, that was way too messy for me. I agree with you very often. I'm like, oh, I don't really love like sponge dauber coloring, because it is a little bit messy. But I'm kind of going for a looser finish to this card. A little bit less, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm going for a less, I don't know what the word is. I'm trying not to make this look extremely well colored. Loose, that's the word I'm looking for. I'm looking for loose coloring here. So I'm getting color kind of in the areas where it goes. I'm not being perfect about it. And that's not easy for me, but that's okay. We have to learn to embrace different techniques. And I thought this would be a fun way to color this, and color it pretty quickly too. I just want to hold it together enough to where I can get color where it belongs and this not move around on me too much. Because remember, we only have a very small amount of adhesive on there. I'm going to clean this off, and I'm going to go to a lighter green. I think, let's hope this is lighter. It seems like it is. We're taking a chance here. This is a more olive. Oh yeah, that brings a more natural look to it. When you get grayed out colors in nature, very seldom is anything in nature going to be bright green, bright blue, bright yellow. Natural colors usually are much more saturated or grayed out colors. And this olive is a saturated color, so it brings a little bit more realism. Not that it's super realistic to have a black line around everything you color as well, but that adds quite a bit to it. Now to me, and this is just me, I can't help it, I think this needs a little bit more contrast, and it needs, oh, there's a little green right there. It needs some green right there. But you guys might not want to do this, the next thing I'm going to do. And if you don't, then don't do it. But I'm going to take this black, and I'm going to take a very light gray ink. So, I think I'm going to do Weathered Wood. Very light gray ink. And I'm going to give this some shadow. So I have quite a bit of ink on here. I'm going to just touch off some. And I'm going to put some Weathered Wood where it's not just white, 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 white everywhere. Where I have a little bit of shadow. It's not working great. You're seeing some brush marks here, and I don't want brush marks. I'll get better. It'll get better. Okay. Those of you who are looking at this saying, yeah, that looks like a hot mess, Tami. You shouldn't have done it. You never know. You never know whenever you're like, oh, I think this would look good. You don't know. Sometimes it just messes everything up. See, I told you it'd get better. It gets better. This might be easier to do with a sponge dauber because we wouldn't have the brush marks to deal with. Realistic coloring. Once again, even though it has a black line around it, realistic coloring is going to include some shadows because in life we have shadows around things. I'm getting brush marks again. It gets better, it gets worse. Okay. And I got one of those dreaded circles. That's probably, let's try this with an actual sponge dauber since I'm having trouble. Okay, so this is a sponge dauber. See if we get less brush marks here. Because those daubers I was using actually had brush to them. Oh, this is actually working better. Now the heartfelt sponge daubers have a triangular shape to them, so you can actually get right into the edge of things with them, with that triangular shape. Now I would not have shadow up across the top of here. I would have it in the dark areas, and I'd even maybe put a little shadow. Oh, yuck, that doesn't look pretty. Hopefully I can fix it. We'll see. That might just be where the sentiment goes. Might cover that up. But anyway, the Heartfelt Creation sponges, really good for coloring more detailed areas because they have that nice triangular shape. I have never had them. I think Sally and Trudy have those, or I know they do a lot of Heartfelt. So if you want to know about it, ask them. And this was Sally's idea for this card too. And I know that the first time I ever did this, triple time stamping, was with Patsy Collins. And I just loved it. But I also remember the very first time I did it thinking, oh no, it's not stamped well on these little edges. And I was so new that I just thought that was terrible. I thought we'd never be able to get over that. And then we put the frames together and I saw how it all comes together and I was so happy with the end results. Now that might look like a hot mess to you. It looks a little bit like a hot mess to me too. But how do you learn if you don't step out of your comfort zone and do things a little bit different way than you're used to doing them? You can't learn. So the next thing we're going to do though is going to fix a lot of this, and that is to add our black frames around it. Okay, I have my 3 pieces of black paper, my A2 card base, my slightly smaller, and then my very smallest square. So what I want to do now is pull these apart gently. They still have that slightly stickiness to them. So this is what you have now. Let's start stacking this up. On my card base, I'm going to put my very bottom piece. Now let me tell you, you could go ahead and glue this one down. Then your next ones, you could pop them up a little bit. And it gives it a lot of dimension and it's really pretty. But for this particular card, I'm going to do them all flat because in my opinion, you get such a beautiful dimension with this card without having to use any foam tape or pop dots or anything. You just have beautiful dimension already. So that's nice and stuck. My next pieces that I will stick together are going to be these pieces. Now this is my preference. You don't have to do it in this order. I like to put these together and make sure the frames look really nice together and then put it onto this piece. If you want to do it the other way around, you can, but this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to frame up each individual white piece of cardstock with its black frame counterpart, and then I'm going to put them together. And if you choose to do it this way, the good thing about it is if you then want to use dimensional tape, foam tape or something to add more dimension to your card, you can. Set that out of the way. And we'll do our last one, which is the very center of the card. Still bugs me that that right there did not stamp, not beautifully. But this card's kind of busy, so hopefully no one will notice that. I hope nobody gets my cards and looks at them with a super critical eye and tries to find things wrong with them. And if I found out they did, I don't think I'd send cards to that person anymore. Just because. Enjoy the card. Don't look for the mistakes. Okay. Now, when you're putting this together, especially if you have a floral pattern, it's kind of important to remember which side is up, which is another reason that I went ahead and put the shading at the bottom of this card, because I know which way is up. So now we're going to put these together. Now, remember when I showed you the wonky? Don't think you can choose to do wonky at this point. You can't. You have to start out that way. However you stick your pieces of paper together and stamp them originally is how you need to put your card back together, because that would look very strange to have that frame without an edge on it. Okay, so I want to stick this down. Once again, this is where you could put your dimensional tape if you really want more dimension. I don't think it's needed for this card, but the best thing about card making is it's very individual. You get to do whatever you want. And this particular card, since you get to choose whatever stamp you want to use, definitely you can do whatever you like, which is the beauty of it. So I just want to be careful and kind of, oh, look what I'm doing. Exactly what I told you not to do. I almost did it upside down. It's very easy to do. And if you do, just carefully pull that sucker up and rearrange it. This is correct now. And as you can see, even though I'm not super happy with how that shading turned out, I'm just such a fan of shading. I thought it needed to be done. Might not have been the best way to do it with that sponge dauber, but I can fix it. I'm going to put this here. So pretty. Now there's a couple of things you can do before you stick this piece down. I've seen several of these that have ribbon in the individual stacks, which is another reason to create your each framed piece as a separate stack so that you could put ribbon through that. I personally think ribbon would be really pretty just on this top one, maybe right across here where it didn't stamp very well, and put a bow. But also just putting a sentiment across here is really pretty too. I think I'm going to fix some of the shading with a colored pencil. And I always love to add just a little bit of highlight with a white gel pen as well. This is just a Jelly Roll pen. And so the parts that are really, really sunshiny and light, I might just put a dab of white along the edge to really brighten it up. So I'm going to use some Gina K Designs sparkle embellishments. These are Angel Aura rhinestones. I'm going to add some embellishments. I'm going to add a little bit of ribbon. And then I'm going to show you some other examples of these cards. Okay, I've glued a couple of embellishments on here just to catch the light. And I decided, remember when I told you that I've seen these that have ribbon around here? I want ribbon on this. I think it would be pretty to have this bow here. But I already glued this together. And this happens to me a lot, so I'm just going to show you what I do. I very carefully take tweezers and lift up an edge because I normally don't get the glue or the tape runner, and this works better with tape runner than glue. There we go. I have an edge lifted a little bit right there. I take my ribbon and slide it under and very carefully use it like a little knife edge to kind of tear through that tape runner. And that's what I do. Now, the absolute best way to do this would be to design your card in advance and know exactly how you want it. Unfortunately, that does not happen for me very often. So I have figured out ways to tear through, rip up, do all that kind of stuff. Now, I will later probably come back and put a tiny bit of glue under there just to make sure that it holds together the way I want it to. And, you know, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But then I'm going to tie this ribbon and I'll have a little bow on this card, which I think will finish it off nicely. So I added a couple of little dots with my white jelly roll pen just to add some dimension to the card. And I made a little tag that says hello just to finish it off. I want this tag down here below this bow. And I'm using liquid adhesive on this just to make sure it's good and stuck and that it's right exactly where I want it. Now, I also always put a little dot of glue underneath my ribbon, no matter what kind of ribbon I use, because I want to make sure that it's good and stuck. And to me, this card is finished. I did not have a hello sentiment small enough, so I just wrote hello with a white jelly roll pen on this. If I had a stamp, it would have been probably much better. But guys, don't be afraid. If you don't have the sentiment you want, to type it in to a word processing document and print it out on your printer, or just write it neatly or even not so neatly and add it to your card. If you don't have the exact sentiment you want, you can create your own sentiment. So this is a handy tip from Sally. When we're done with the outside of our card and we're ready to put the inside together, very oftentimes we will cut a piece of thick cardstock and put it on the inside of the card. And that's great. And if you want to do that, do that. But here's a handy tip from Sally. It's less expensive. It's easier to write on. And if you mess it up, you can replace this pretty easily. This is typewriter paper or printer paper. And she cuts it just a 1/4 inch smaller than her card base. So this card base is 5.5 by 8.5. So this is 5 1/4 by 8 1/4. Just a 1/4 inch smaller. Very easy to fold in half. Unlike cardstock that is sometimes very difficult to get folded in half properly. Then you can put it inside like this. And instead of gluing the whole thing down, take one small strip of tape runner and put it right there. Line your folded parts together. Close the card. And it's loose. Now, if you don't like it loose like this, you could put tape runner all the way around the edge. But especially if you have lots to say to someone, you now have this entire area to write on, here and here. I probably wouldn't do the back because it is adhered there. You can actually stamp on this. You could run this through your printer and put a sentiment on it and then cut it into size. but it makes for a lovely insert in your card. And that was a handy tip from Sally, because sometimes, and I know I've done it, you glue that piece of white cardstock in there and then you try to stamp on it or write on it and you mess up, and trying to get that out is a mess. This, however, you can actually pull out relatively easy. Now, you mess it up, you just put another one in, but if you're happy with it and you leave that in place, after a while, that becomes a lot more permanent, just like anything else. And if you burnish it down, it's a lot more permanent. And it does make for a lovely inside card base, and it's maybe a little bit easier to write on than some of them. So there you go. That's my version of the triple time stamp or triple stamping card. And I want to show you lots and lots of other ones to get your imagination going. So look at your stamps that you may have. Try to imagine all the different ways you can do this. And I wanted to tell you, I did tell you earlier, that you could do this with circles or hearts if you have infinity dies, which means that you could pick out 3 different sizes of circles like this, and you could cut out frames that were just 1/4 of an inch bigger. You can do this same triple time stamping with circles.